Oh. Oh.
We're gonna be introduced.
All right. Welcome to Zibby's Bookshop. Thank you for joining us tonight. Anyone who's new, we're going to be passing around the set sheet. So feel free to leave your name and email address. We are here tonight to celebrate the launch of The House of Plain Truth by Zibby Books author Donna Hemans. Donna is the author of the novels River Woman and Tea by the Sea. Her fiction and nonfiction have appeared in numerous literary magazines. She lives in Maryland and is the owner of DC Writers Room, a co-working studio for writers. Donna is joined by Liz Ziemska. Liz is a bookseller and author of Mandelbrot, the Magnificent, an alt history family drama that takes place during the Nazi occupation of France, based on the life of
Benoit.
Thank you. Mandelbrot, who created fractal theory. We'd also like to thank Incausa Incense for providing incense boxes in your little gift bags. And yeah, thank you. Take it away.
So this lovely novel, which I finished yesterday, I'm going to begin because it has like two inciting incidents. One is that the novel is told from the point of view of Perline,
Right.
who is a woman of Jamaican descent who lives in Brooklyn, and she has a daughter and she has a granddaughter. One granddaughter? Two grandkids. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so the way the novel begins is that she gets word from her siblings in Jamaica that her dad is passing away. He's close to the end and she wants to go home and be with him. She's also been a nurse her entire professional life in America. And so she feels like she really needs to be there. So, but what I'm going to say is that the real inciting incident began even earlier for her dad. Her dad's name is Rupert. And what happened to Rupert is that he was a very proud man who wanted to do more for his family, and he couldn't do it in his native Jamaica, so he had to leave. So I'm going to ask Donna to read a little bit from Rupert's point of view so that you get the state of mind of this man who's about to transfer a legacy to his daughter on his deathbed. So, and it's so beautiful. So.
Okay. What he knew, actually, this
Wherever
section.
Yeah, wherever you want to start. Yeah.
Okay. Let me read a different section.
Yeah.
This section I'm going to read is from the first chapter, and it's in the morning, and Perline and her sisters generally go out in the morning and ask Rupert to name his children because he has dementia, and so this is just one of the things they do. Rupert named his children, and now Perline begins to think that some people refuse to be forgotten. These siblings of hers who have lived only in her family's collective memory, of a moment on a wharf in Santiago de Cuba, want to be heard. That moment, which marks the last time the living members of her family were together, is stamped in her memory. She replays it now as she has done over the years. Rupert wears his best suit and hat. He's never without his hat. And her mother, Irene, wears a starched white dress, her belly big with the baby she would name Ermina. Perline is 4 and Eileen 7. Those are the two girls who returned in 1933 to Jamaica. Their oldest sister, Annie, is already a married woman who chooses to stay behind in Cuba. And David and Gerardo, soon-to-be men, are staying behind too. Irene extracts a promise from Annie to take care of the boys. The goodbyes are loud and long, and the voices like a cacophony of birds, English and Haitian Creole spoken by the people who are leaving, and Spanish from those overseeing the departures. Annie leans over, whispers, "On a clear day, you can see Cuba from there." Perline believes her, and she and Eileen look out at the blue sea for a glimpse of the distant island, Jamaica. And then they are gone. The last 2 baby girls in the family repatriated at the government's expense to an island they had never known. Ermina was nearly born on the ship, but Irene makes it ashore before the baby comes. There isn't room on the ship even for a song. A single whistle maybe, but not a song. Rupert wants no disturbance, no outward signs of displeasure or anxiety or disappointment. A ship's passage paid for by the government isn't the way he wants to return home. He wants to come home like the men who went to Panama, the Colon man with his gold chain and pocket watch. So he finds fault in everything: the waves that rock the boat, the men who report from deck on the land visible in the distance, the clouds that roll behind, threatening rain. Pearline and Eileen, nervous and fidgeting, looking forward. From where they stand, there is no looking back. Even if they could have looked back, Rupert would have ordered them not to. From the moment he stepped onto the ship, he turned his back on Cuba and his children left behind on the wharf, until now, this moment when he calls the forbidden names.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was so gorgeous.
Thanks.
So the idea that a lot of people who grew up many generations in safety in one country don't understand is that a lot of people have to leave their country to make money. So can you talk about like who went to Panama? Was it Rupert's uncle, or when did this start? Like when did this displacement begin? Like there are all these countries and they're all different languages and they're all colonized by different European countries. So can you just trace for the rest of us who don't know this, what went down?
Right. So in, I guess, late 1800s, early 1900s, there was indeed a lot of Jamaicans and people from around the Caribbean islands who went to Panama to help with the building of the Panama Canal. And so once the canal was complete, a lot of those workers did not necessarily want to go back home. And so they were looking for new places to go. And Cuba, of course, was then the next place that a lot of people went to, largely because there were a lot of American companies that were going into Cuba and buying up and building up the sugar cane.
And not to interrupt you, what's interesting is that the company that Rupert worked for had its corporate offices in New York City.
Right.
Which is just interesting.
Right. Yeah. So there were a lot of companies that were operating there. And the American companies pretty much petitioned the Cuban government to allow workers from a lot of the Caribbean islands to come into Cuba because they needed a labor force. And so Rupert was one of those who traveled to Cuba to make more money, because at that point, the amount of money that he could have made in Cuba was double what he would have made in Jamaica. So that's, the reason behind a lot of the movement. And so there were also some people who went to Costa Rica as well, the banana plantations and tobacco. So it really was just movement to other countries to make more money.
Yeah, and the thing about Rupert, that he did it not just to have money and just to have things, but he wanted to buy land.
Right.
He wanted to buy land where his family could finally call home. It would have been their land, as opposed to the land that his relatives had worked, for instance, because the house of Plain Truth is down the hill from a large estate, right? And the large estate was British owned.
Right, British owned.
Yes, it was British. And then when did Jamaica secede from the Commonwealth?
Well, Jamaica only gained independence in 1962.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So right.
So if you've been watching The Crown, it's when they were lamenting the loss of all their colonies. That's one of the colonies that Queen Elizabeth was very upset about losing, very embarrassed about losing, because anyway. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So, but what he wanted was to legitimately buy the land that his relatives had worked as laborers to raise his family. So it was not like Rupert just wanted money to buy fancy cars or anything. So so the real inciting incident of your book, which is so interesting, is that Pearline discovers, well, first of all, I talk about the family dynamics because Pearline is the only one who went to America, whereas the other two sisters stayed in Jamaica. And then once Pearline comes back, the other two sisters want to sell the land, right?
Right. Yeah.
So because they have bills.
Well, yeah, they have bills. I mean, and it's an old house, and old houses have issues, lots of issues. And the sisters, I guess, had been living in Jamaica all these years, dealing with the house, dealing with their father, and they were tired. They did not want to have to like maintain yet another piece of property when they had their property to maintain.
Yeah.
But Pearline, when she comes back, she wants to do everything that her father had not been able to do in his lifetime. Like as you said, he wanted land, but he was also a farmer, and he wanted to farm. He wanted to build not just like subsistence farming, but much more than that, a much bigger operation, which he hadn't really been able to do. And so Pearline, when she comes back to Jamaica, her goal is to fulfill her father's dream and to make sure that this family does not fail. That too is one of the other big issues for her, because for them, going to Cuba and coming back without a lot of money to buy land for Rupert was failure. And so Pearline has held on to this idea in her family that they are, that failure is their legacy. And so she comes back to Jamaica wanting to in some ways change that idea and build a completely different legacy.
Yeah. But it's interesting. There's another passage which I don't immediately have, where she talks about how nice it would be to come back to a country where people didn't make fun of her accent or didn't make a note of her accent, where she actually didn't. She felt like a foreigner in America, and not only that, she only had a resident alien. She didn't even have a passport. So
she never completed a process and applied for citizenship.
So she has this it's not even ulterior motive; it's a natural moment of wanting, like, you know what, I'm good. My daughter is fine. I can go home now. But what they find out when they read the will is that there's a mystery person on the deed.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and the mystery person has the same last name as sort of the firstborn, but same first name, but a different last name. It's the last name of the colonizer house at the top of the hill. So therein lies the mystery. Who is this person? And we can't sell the house without her, which is good for Pearlina.
Right, good for Pearline, right.
Because she doesn't want to sell the house. But at the same time, the dad leaves her with, what does the dad say on his deathbed?
Right, so he says two things. One is to find her siblings who had been left behind in Cuba, and the second is to be his memory. And so Pearline doesn't quite know what it means to be his memory. She doesn't know what stories her father wants her to hold on to. And so that is part of her quest, to try to figure out how everything is connected. The siblings who were left behind, this house, this history, or these memories that she has to hold on to.
And then what's so interesting is that I love the way Pearline then creates like almost a new family for herself. Because talk about like Claudia and Derek. So these two other young people who come into her life, who almost recreate a new little nuclear family for her. I mean, mention that briefly, because that becomes like her own new project, is to mother these children.
Right. Yeah. So I think one of Pearline's issues is that she, because she was repatriated from Cuba, and she lived in America and didn't quite fully feel at home in America, she wants to belong to a place where it's home and where nobody can remove her from this place. So that is one of the things for her. So when she goes back to Jamaica, there is a child who's living there, whose mother had been taking care of her father. And her mother then goes off now that this older man is dead, her mother goes off to work in Cayman Islands. And so Pearline is left with this little, like 4-year-old child. And then another young man shows up at the house who happens to be her nephew, who she never knew nothing at all about, because her father had another child that nobody knew about. So that is yet another secret that comes out. But part of her decision when this young man arrives is that she has to decide, do I send him away, or do I do what I really believe this land should be? A place from which no family member will be removed, a place for all family members. And so what she ends up doing is allowing this young man to stay, which of course is a big surprise to her sisters, because nobody knows who he is, and why would you let this total stranger come and stay in the house with not only an older, like 60-something-year-old woman and a very young child?
but it feels natural. Like
right.
Perlene just goes on instinct, which
Mhm.
I love, because she's a very rational woman. She's a
Right.
nurse, trained as a
Mhm.
nurse. So I just want to ask a couple questions. I want to ask you to comment on certain themes. Yeah, I mean, what I love is that she doesn't even question, oh, my dad obviously had another family. Like, you don't go on and on about that. It's just like, okay, it happened, just bring in the boy, which I
Right.
love, because
Yeah.
in an average book you'd be like, oh my God, what did the dad do? Who's the woman? I need to find out. That would be the subject of the book,
Right.
but that's
Yeah.
not the subject of your book at all. It's
Yeah,
just
that would
like
have been a completely different book.
a
And certainly, I mean,
yeah, completely
maybe I can write
valid.
that one next.
Yeah, but
But
it's like, yeah, what
yeah.
you know what? It happened.
Right.
Bring the
Yeah.
boy in,
Yeah.
whatever.
And at that point, it
Yeah.
wasn't, like the brother wasn't
Yeah.
there. She was now dealing with this
Yeah.
nephew of hers who, I came into this family with no, it wasn't his fault. He had
No.
no, so
No, his
what
father
could
had
she
sent
do?
him
Right. His father had
from
sent from
Brooklyn to
Brooklyn.
Jamaica, like, here, go.
Yeah.
And I love the way you don't belabor that
Mhm.
point. And I love the way Derek just like comes
Yeah.
right in and starts taking care of things.
Right.
But and then and I don't want to give away any more plot points, because this, you could see how much is on Perlene's head right now. There's a lot. Her sisters are trying to sell the land out from under her. They can't, because there's a deed question, but the deed question is the huge question, like, who's this woman? And then she's got these two young people she's taking care of. And then you bring in another wonderful element that I want you to talk about, because there's a ghosting.
Right.
There's a ghosting. And what I love is, what is it, a duppy? Is that what a ghost is? Talk
Duppy.
about that, and talk about the it's sort of like, it's supernatural, but it isn't. It's sort of psychological. Like, can you talk about that element? Because it's this novel is very, very, very real.
Right.
But then Rupert comes back as like a presence that won't let her.
Right. Yeah, he is a presence. And I like looking at it that way, because I think some of it is also guilt. Perlene has this charge, and if she is stepping back and not doing it, she's feeling guilty about what her father has asked her to do that she's not doing.
Right.
And her sisters as well. So I don't want to talk too much about what happens to what happens to her sisters, but a lot of it is just this haunting of memory. And I think too that one of the things that I wanted to be able to do in the book is talk about what happened to the family in Cuba, in order to understand why there were some children who were left behind in Cuba that Perlene has to find. And Perlene was 3-4 years old when the family returned to Jamaica. So there is only so much that she could tell. And the other way to get to that was really through Rupert. And Rupert has to find a way to tell her what it is that he wants her to remember of the family story, the family history, and really get a good solid sense of who she is as a person and who the family is. Because that is a part of what she wants to do, is to change this narrative that we are a set of people who fail and become something else. And in order to get to that point, she has to understand fully where they were coming from.
And so I think, does Rupert, like, do you think he sent, because these people are Christian, right?
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of yeah, I remember one of the sisters comes over, she's like, yeah, he's been haunting my dreams too. And again, that's not commented on. Like, literally, two sisters are haunted, but nobody talks about that there's a ghost.
Yeah, and I think it's just something that is so natural to to the Jamaican experience, and not just Jamaican. I mean, I think
that
it's
a little bit.
It's
the layering
right.
of the cultures.
Right. Yeah, it's African in origin, and so generally when a person dies, there are certain things that you are supposed to do in order to allow this ghost to go to rest. And there's questions, of course, within this book, because you're looking at Perlene, who has lived out of Jamaica for 30 years. How much of that, is she following? And her sisters certainly aren't following a lot of those traditions. So, I think in some ways you can look at what is what is traditional and what is, what does the modern family do.
Mhm.
So I think they're just, it really is just tradition and culture.
Traditional culture,
Right.
yeah.
That people, I can remember when my mother died, that's, one question a couple of weeks after somebody asked me,
Mhm.
like, has she appeared to you yet?
Interesting.
Which is not something that I was really, like thinking about and looking for.
Right, right.
But, if she came, she came.
Right.
I didn't do anything. She wouldn't be haunting me in a negative way.
Right. So
I would think it would be positive.
It's not a horror movie. It's
right.
Not,
It's not a horror.
It's not The
Right.
Exorcist.
It's
It's not. It's not. You know.
Mhm.
It's just a lovely,
right.
lovely expression of living with your
Mhm.
ancestors.
Right. And I think that is it for Pearline. That
Yeah.
like she wants her father to come because she wants to know
Yeah.
what it is exactly
What do you want me to do?
that
Yeah.
she should be doing.
Where
right.
should I be looking?
Right.
And at the same time, she's pulled because she's now taking care of a 4-year-old and a. How
Mhm.
old is Derek?
Derek is think like early 20s.
Early
like,
20s.
mhm.
So how is she going to go investigate what her dad wants
Mhm.
while
when she has
when
right.
she has these?
Yeah.
So she's really in a bind.
Right. Not
Mhm.
only that, but
Yeah.
if she leaves, what are her sisters going to do to the
So,
property when she's
exactly,
gone?
exactly.
So right, there's a lot of push and
And
pull.
so the pressure builds and builds, and we won't
Mhm.
talk about like what happens, but
Right.
the pressure builds and builds, and like how is a woman going to figure this out on her
Right.
own? And so I wanted to then let's see. We talked about Pearline sort of has a talk about Pearline and her daughter Josette.
Mhm.
What's up with them? There's a tension there, and what is that from?
Yeah, I think a lot of that tension is just based on Pearline's life in New York. I mean,
Mhm.
she spent a lot of time working, and working and working, and not a lot of time taking care of her daughter. Not in the way that her child would want her to be present. So I think there is just some friction there based on that,
Mhm.
that experience. And her father had a heart attack. Josette, this is Pearline's daughter, had a heart attack. Pearline wasn't there because she was at work. So I think, Josette has held that too against her mother. So
Right.
that is part of the tension.
Especially because the mother is a nurse and she
Right, she
maybe
would
should have
have-
paid more
right.
attention.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's like it's kind of good to get away from Josette's
Mhm.
judgment a little
Right.
bit.
Mhm.
But then what happens when Josette appears on the island? She's like, "Wait, who are these two young people?"
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that's a great
Mhm.
great moment in the book
Mhm.
when you could tell. But she's very good about it.
Right,
She's
yeah.
not a brat.
Right.
Which
No,
is
I mean, she's
wonderful.
accepting in a lot of ways, just like her
but
mother.
she's an
right.
American, right?
But
She was
right.
born there, and
Mhm.
it's completely to her. It's like I don't understand. You've got my kids, your grandkids.
Mhm.
Why are you giving your time and your
Mhm.
energy to these people? And then there's another interesting point that I want to bring up, and that there's this whole conception of what immigrant children are and are not allowed to
Mhm.
choose as their profession, which
Well,
is
yes.
interesting, which you and I share because I'm an immigrant family too, and I wasn't
Mhm.
allowed to be a writer. There's no way. There's no way. So talk about that. Like,
Mhm.
what is it? Like, the arts are not available if you're
Right.
children of immigrant, and you should feel guilty about pursuing it. This is like a side note that's like about the text and about us
Right.
as people.
Yeah, I think it's both, but it is
Yeah.
also really important because it plays in, to Pearline when Derek comes.
Yeah.
Because Derek he's an artist, he's drawing.
Yeah.
And Pearline had also been the person who told her daughter that she shouldn't, pursue
Josette wanted to
documentary.
be
Right.
a filmmaker.
Right.
And she said, no, you
she
can't.
said no,
'cause
right.
It's irresponsible, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So Pearline now has this opportunity to, in some ways, encourage this young man. And she uses that in a way. And I don't want to talk too much about how she uses it, but it gives her an opportunity to do something that she didn't do with her own daughter. So when Josette comes, she too sees the different ways in which her mother is treating this young man and the way she did not treat her. So again, there's some more tension there between mother and daughter because she is giving to this young man the opportunities that Josette wished she had.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I want to just step away from the text a little bit. How did your parents feel about you becoming a writer?
Initially when I told my, and I remember having a conversation with my parents that I was going to study, journalism. Because initially, when I started college, my plan was to study law. Learned very early on that no, that is not what I wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I remember saying, I wanted to do journalism, and my mother was a little bit hesitant because she thought I wanted to be, like in front of a camera on TV, and that is not at all what I wanted to do. I just wanted to write. But my mother was also a teacher, and she was, I think, a lot more open to allowing me to do different things than, like I think a lot of other immigrant parents. It helped in some ways. My parents were in Jamaica at that point. So I think that probably helped. But I think, like my mother, I think, was just a lot more open to me doing, like what I want to do. My father had nothing, he was just more laid back, whatever you want to do. But, like my mother would be the one who would probably say, oh, no, you shouldn't. But she,
that's what I got. I did pre-med because that was what I was supposed to do, which was a complete waste of everyone's time. But that's okay. But yeah, that is a thing. So it's so interesting that when Josette comes and she's like, wait, you're gonna pay for Derek's art school? Like what?
Yeah. But the person who had something to say about what I was studying was not even my parents, was not even somebody who I knew. So at the time I was living with one of my aunts in New York, and somebody called the house. Again, I have no idea who it was. And, it went on with this long conversation about the fact that I was studying English. And he said, like liberal arts degree, what can you do with that? And I got off the phone just really surprised. Like this person who knew my name, knew all about my life, was telling me what I should be studying. And I had no idea who this person was. But again, a lot of it was this whole idea that as an immigrant, there are certain things that you should be doing. And, like the arts was just not useful. Right. The arts was not it.
The arts were not it. So that's interesting when you talk about arts being, like very white or dominantly European culture. I mean, that's a little bit why. Because our parents, don't want us to make the risk of, they don't want to pay our rent. Well,
that
adults,
is a part
which
of
is
it.
really normal to not want to pay the rent of a 30-something
it's really
child.
True, and I agree with them. But I think the other part of it too, it's what you know. Because you grow up and you see, you know doctors, lawyers, teachers, but you don't know writers. For the most part, you don't grow up seeing writers. So I think it's harder for a certain generation to really look at and think of, like their children as moving into these careers that they've just never seen anybody doing at all.
Yeah, that's very true. Anyway, I wanted to make a point of that because that was interesting. I'm like, oh, I really relate to that. All right, we talked about the haunting. We talked about, okay. So before I step out of the text and ask about your writing process, which I definitely want to talk about because you've been at this book for a long time, and thank goodness you stuck with it.
Right.
But the other thing that I love about this book so much is nature. How much we are in nature throughout this novel, and also food.
Right.
Can you talk about that? What is your affinity to nature, and what are you a chef? Are you do you love food? Like, tell me, was it on purpose that you're like, I want to infuse this Jamaican landscape with as much beauty as I possibly can? Because we don't really hear much about Brooklyn other than, what we would expect.
Yeah, I don't know that there is, well, I can say every plant that I have ever planted has died.
So you're not a natural.
I'm not, no. So this is my way of growing things. I mean, they exist only on the page, but not in a garden at all. But I do cook. I mean, but I don't think I do anything, extra or anything, big or different. I just cook when I need to eat. But I think a part of it is that, you write really well about what you know. And so that's the landscape I know. And so I think I write about it much
How much
more
time did
than
you spend in Jamaica? Did you go back and forth?
yeah, I go back and forth all the time.
Okay.
I left Jamaica when I was 16, and I am there usually once or twice a year.
Okay.
But I think too, a part of it is that I'm looking at it from the perspective of Pearline in this case,
Right.
because Pearline is going back to Jamaica after living abroad for 30 years.
Right.
So I think there's also for her just going to be a completely different perspective because
Mhm.
she's seeing everything anew. So I think that is why you end up seeing so much of that in the
Right.
book. And I think if I ever wrote a book, like in much more detail about, like let's say Brooklyn,
Mhm.
maybe I would be able to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe your love for your country shows through, and you can't
yeah.
stop yourself from writing about all these beautiful, the
Right.
rain, the view of
Mhm.
the little sliver of the ocean that they can
Right.
see,
Mhm.
Pearline bathing in the ocean.
Mhm.
It's all so beautiful, and
Right.
all like even the making of the coconut milk and the
Oh.
what is chocolate tea? I just want to know. Will you tell us what chocolate tea is?
Chocolate tea
And I
is
want
just
some.
yeah.
Where can I get it?
It's you can actually buy the little chocolate ball thingamajig.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can get it on Amazon these
Okay.
days. But it's just like our version of hot chocolate. So it's
Mm.
the coconut that's just grated. It's boiled with coconut milk and I guess sweetened maybe with sugar, and that's pretty much it. It's not as thick and I don't drink it. I write
Yeah.
about it, but I don't drink
Okay.
it. But it's not as thick as like hot chocolate that you would get here, but it's still like rich and chocolatey, I think.
Well, it sounds amazing. And so now I definitely want to ask you about your writing process, because I read in some of your interviews that you started this book in 2006.
Right. Mhm.
And then you were initially writing it from the point of view of like Pearline's grandniece.
Right.
And that it took you a long time to figure out who was going to tell the story. And I
Mhm.
completely relate, because I've been working on a novel since 2008, and the point of view
Mhm.
has radically shifted. So please tell us
Mhm.
the transition, the
Right.
process of finding your voice with this.
Yeah, so when I started it, yes, it was Pearline's grandniece, and she was about 18 years old. And of course, 18 years old, there's not very much life. She hasn't lived much. And I think that was a large problem with her, except for the fact that she was telling this older woman's story. She didn't have a story of her own. And so as I continued and tried in various drafts to give her a story, it just didn't work. So I stopped for a little bit and I went on and I wrote Tea by the Sea.
Mhm.
And so somewhere around 2016, I started writing a separate section about a woman who gives up her life and goes back to Jamaica. And so once I started writing that, it sounded like Pearline. And so
And
I
how
think
did
I
you
finally.
know? How did you know? Did you was just like, were you being haunted the
Mhm.
way Rupert haunted
No,
Pearline?
it just sounded like her.
You
I
were like,
think
this
there
is
were
right.
this is her. This is this other
Yeah.
character from this book, and so it
Right.
just felt like I was telling that story in a different way.
Mhm.
So that's when I realized that this is the person who needed to tell her own story, as
Mhm.
opposed to having this 18-year-old tell the story.
Mhm.
And so once I started doing that, the book really just fell into place,
Mhm.
and it worked in a way
Yeah.
that it just hadn't worked before.
Yeah. And let me ask you, the action takes place in 93, 94. Why
Mhm.
did you choose that time period? Did you want it before the Cuba opened up to the rest of the world? Like, what was your decision, or just?
It was just math.
Yeah.
Because I needed a family to go back to Jamaica in 1931,
Oh, got
somewhere
it, got
around
it.
there.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah,
the inciting incident going to Cuba
right.
needed to happen
Mhm.
before the revolution, and
Well,
yeah.
yeah, my grandparents went to Cuba in 1919 and left in
Mm.
1931.
Mhm.
So my initially what I wanted to do was to basically figure out what had happened to them, what their experience was like
Mm.
in Cuba. So that was a time frame I was working with. So 60 years later,
Right.
Pearline now would be around 1993.
Right.
So I think that kind of sort of the age range matched and
Mhm.
mirrored my father and uncles and stuff. So that
Experience.
was
Yeah.
pretty much what I was
Great.
looking at. Yeah.
So, is there anything else you want us to know? What you want the audience to know about your book? We've given them some hints. What? Have I missed something? What?
No, I think that's it. I mean,
Yeah.
Pearline is
She's a great character.
Yeah, she's a great character. She's
She's a thoroughly modern woman with extremely like warm. I want to say traditional, but she's not traditional.
Right.
She's an interesting character. I haven't come across a woman like her in a while in fiction.
Right. Yeah, and I think once I got to writing about her, I realized that I hadn't really read a lot of books about a 60-something-year-old woman. And so that's one of the things that I like about the book, that, we're reading about an age range that's really mostly ignored in literature.
Did you do research? Did you read other novels, or there aren't that many?
No, I just looked around at the people I know and
somehow at your loved ones. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, great. I want to open it up to questions at this point. If anyone has any questions about.
I enjoyed the book. I read it. How much of your own life is infused inside the stories of the characters?
Not very much. There are bits and pieces in there. When my grandmother, I think in the first section or section I read, Perline's mother was pregnant when they went back to Jamaica. And my grandmother was pregnant when they went back to Jamaica. My grandmother returned to Jamaica, or my grandparents returned to Jamaica with all their children. So that part is definitely not true at all. So there are bits and pieces in there that, I mirror my family's experience, but not very much. A lot of it is really just research, because by the time my grandmother died when I was 16, and my grandfather when I was about 20, 21, somewhere around there. So I never had that opportunity to ask them what their experience was like. So it's not very much of their personal experience that's in here. It's more my understanding of what they could have experienced during that time period.
The lady behind you.
I was curious what your own family has thought about the book. Do they see themselves in it at all, even though you may not see them in it?
Well, one of my uncles asked which house I was talking about, because there is my grandparents' house that is, some question about what to do with it. So, and I assured him that it was not that house. But yeah, I think the thing about, writing and having family members read it is that everybody picks up something else and they think that it's them when it is not at all. But yeah, outside of that, nobody has, they're still talking to me. Let's put it that way.
I was a little late, so if you address this already, I apologize. But I was really fascinated by the relationship with sisters. Can you talk a little bit about that tension and dynamic? It seemed like it was probably fun to write that, but I mean, I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the entire book was fun to write. Actually, well, when I got to the point where it started working, it was fun to write. But yeah, I think I wanted to, I really look at, like some of the things that you see all the time where somebody might leave, and it might not necessarily be one country moving to another place. It could be somebody who stayed home, whether, like in the Midwest, and the other family member moved to the East Coast. And so sometimes there is some tension there with the people who stayed versus the one who left. And so that really is what I wanted to do here in this book, is really look at how, like this dynamic between sisters, just how it changes from, like two who stayed are now have this very close bond. And the one who went away is just trying to worm her way back in and fit in to this little, bond that they have created, and she just can't get back in. So that, is, it was sort of fun to write. And I have two sisters, and so I have had to assure them that this is not them. Has nothing to do with us. But it happens, in families all the time.
What do you feel that your community or the surrounding communities around you could have done or could do in the future to ensure that people people are considered other, or just any kind of other still feel part and accepted by their own communities? I ask that because like I'm a woman of color and like I grew up in a Mexican family, traditional Mexican family. I left to the East Coast, did all the whatever college things, and yeah, there was a lot of tension, right? They feel like there's not a lot of like systems or practices in place that communities of color or like ethnic communities do in order to kind of welcome back people into home and make them feel like they're still part of home. Does my question make sense? Am I just rambling?
No, it makes sense. I'm not sure. I think a lot of it is really dependent on the individual families. I can say, like from Jamaica in particular, that there are some people who, I just frown upon people leaving the country and going somewhere else because of brain drain and all of those other things. So, that is a big issue. And I don't know how you fix that. You have to understand why people leave, and you also have to understand why people return. And that I think is just simply also just a personal decision that sometimes you just have to step back and let people do what they need to do. If they come back, you figure out a way to, like embrace them. But it's or not, or not, yes, because sometimes you don't want to. But yeah, it is. I don't know that there's any easy fix at all, just because you have to leave. Sometimes you do.
In the Caribbean, it is that I'm from St. Croix, and it's after Hurricane Hugo came through, so many people left, and there was that tension, that huge tension that existed.
Right. Yeah. 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 And when I look at, in Jamaica in particular, like most of the people I went to school with are not in Jamaica. They're somewhere else. Because the majority right now of the work that's available is in the tourism industry. And is that what you want to do? If that's not what you want to do, what else are you going to do? You're probably going to leave to find, fulfillment in some ways. So,
How did you change personally over the process of writing this story?
I don't know. I want to think that I'm the same person, but I think a book changes you in a lot of different ways. And I think a large part of it for me was really the historical piece that I now understand. Growing up, I knew that my grandparents went to Cuba. That's what I knew. I knew about, who was born in Jamaica, who was born in Cuba, but I didn't have any other nitty-gritty details. And so I think reading this book and getting a better understanding of just, like what happened, like historically, what what the conditions were like in Cuba, just really gave me a different understanding of migration and movement in different countries and different places. Certainly I know some things, I know that immigrants are not always welcome, regardless of where they are in the world. But I did not necessarily know that about Cuba and Jamaica. They're 90 miles apart. It was not at all what I expected. And also because growing up, Jamaica had a completely different relationship with Cuba that did not at all give me any kind of sense that what I discovered had just really happened.
What is your process for working through writer's block, resistance, like on a very granular level? I'm just curious about your creative process, especially when you're up against something that's not working like you had at the beginning.
Yeah, I don't like to beat myself up trying to get something to work. And if it's not working, I tend to step away. When, like in this case, when the book just wasn't working, I set it aside and went on and did something else. And so sometimes it is maybe on a day-to-day basis, it might be walking away from the computer and just doing something else altogether, or working in a different place, moving from the physical location of home and working somewhere else. Because I think sometimes that movement, that change, just changing one little thing opens up your mind in a different way. But like with a big project, if it's just not working, it really is just setting it aside for me. And whether it's writing a short story or reading something else, usually when I come back to it, I come back with a different perspective. Yeah, I think there is another.
It's not just a little question. I feel very connected when we read the book at the beginning when Oprah died at the funeral. And the parents, sisters, they complained about this 9 nights funeral, like staying for 9 nights. That's too exhausting. When I got died, I don't want all of this. It's too tired for my kids. And I feel connected because my grandma died 1 month before when I started reading the book.
Oh,
And
sorry to
my
hear.
mom called me. We had this similar. We don't have like 9 nights, but we have 5 nights.
Okay.
So they stayed off like for almost 9 nights, and then all the relatives and friends come like stay in the evening, and my parents they cannot sleep. And she complained to me, "Oh, you don't need to do this for me. When I die, I don't want all this process." And this question, when she said to me, I said, "Okay, I'm not that kind of person. I won't do this. I'll do the simple way. Don't worry about that." but this question and the way she talked to me keeps haunting me. Like, was that really what she thinks? Or she just worried? Or should she actually wanted to be that way?
Yeah, sometimes I think that people really want that. Like my mother said the same thing. Like she said, like, bury me the next day if you can, because she did not want any of the big hoopla. She didn't want. She always said, like, she didn't want a eulogy at her funeral because anything you have to say to me, you should say to me when I'm alive. And so when she died, we were able to do it in a week, and we tried our best on it. I mean, there's no way we're going to do it the next day because that just wouldn't have worked. But we tried, to honor that by doing it as quickly as possible. So I think that when people say that that's what they want, that's exactly what they mean.
Interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I looked thematically that Berlin lived, feels like her life in service to almost everybody that she encountered, whether it was her daughter or her father after he died. And I felt like nobody kind of recognized that she had her own grief of her husband died and he didn't get away. But I was just wondering kind of how you felt about her strength despite taking on so much for other people.
Yeah, I think it's the older child syndrome, I guess. And I'm the middle child, so that's not my syndrome. But I think it's very hard sometimes to really look at and to understand what somebody's going through. And I think you certainly see it a lot with people who have migrated. And I think anybody here who has family in, like back home, who expect the person who has come to, like this new foreign country to kind of reach back or to always be sending back. They don't necessarily understand what it is, what that person who has migrated is really going through. And I don't think Pearline's sisters would ever understand it at all, because she really sacrificed a lot. I mean, she worked round the clock, not just to take care of her family here, but to also send back and help, like the family in Jamaica. And it's just a reality, like it's a reality for us, like I know I can say definitely it's a reality for Jamaica, and I can imagine it's the same for people from like other countries where you are really working very hard to send and to support your immediate family, your like extended family in so many different ways.
Do you think she has any regrets? I know she, like you said, worked a lot and sacrificed a lot. Do you think she has any regrets of going to America or even working so much and not paying attention? Because if she hadn't worked, then she wouldn't have had the money to send back to her family and to provide.
Yeah, I think the only regret I see is with her daughter. because I think there's some places there where the way she talked about her relationship with Josette, she wanted a different kind of relationship. And I don't know that she could have done that any differently, but I think that's the one thing that I can say she definitely regrets. Yeah. Was there another?
Did you ever think about putting in like a romance for Perlene in the book? I mean, just because you're talking about, how it's rare to see a main character who is, this age, and like, I'm just curious if you considered putting in a romance.
People die in my book, so Perlene is just happy to be alive at this point. Because in previous versions, the Perlene that you see here is not the Perlene who was in previous versions. So I'm just happy that she's alive.
She has a romance with her life, her new life.
No.
I think that everyone.
I have one just for fun.
Oh.
Yeah.
Your book's made into a movie. Who is starring in the starring roles?
I don't know. I don't know. I have not thought about that at all. And I know I'm in LA. I'm supposed to have some names, but
Yeah, exactly.
Are you writing another book at the moment?
I am, yes. So one of the problems that I have is that I end up starting projects and setting them aside. So I have now returned to the second book I ever started writing, which I think is now finally working in a way that I really like it. So I am hopefully we'll be finished with that book sometime this year.
Well, we're looking forward to reading it.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. And there are books at the front, and Donna will be signing. So yeah, and there are refreshments. And please,
Thank you.
yeah. I guess you stay here. I don't know.
Oh, I stay here.
Oh, or you can stretch. You can stretch around.
Yeah.
People will find you.
Okay.
Get a drink.